Welcome back, Menaces. Music. Albums. We all love them. There are many, many albums I've seen referred to as perfect albums. I mean, this person thinks Donda 2 is a 10 out of 10. And naturally, there are a few albums that I'd consider perfect myself. Here's just a few examples on screen. If y'all saw my video a couple months ago, I handed out a few perfect scores in that as well. But I've listened to most of those albums since that video came out, and there's one album that I just keep getting caught on, and that's Spelling's The Turning Wheel. I love every song on this project except for the song Revolution, and it was mostly that track which stopped me from giving The Turning Wheel a 10. So today I thought it would be interesting, as sort of a spiritual successor to that video, to go over a few albums that I consider to be near perfect. As in, I love every track on the album, but there's just one song that is significantly worse than the rest. Though before we can get to any of the albums I consider near perfect, we have to go over what makes an album perfect. I think in some ways my bar for a perfect album is simultaneously higher and lower than other people's. I think a perfect album is an album where every song on it is perfect, which I bet many people would say is a very strict definition, but my standards for what makes a perfect song are a little loose. I'm always surprised when I go into music discussions and I see people saying stuff like, such and such is low-key a flawless song, and it's like, yeah, it's flawless. Half the songs on that album are flawless. In fact, I call so many songs perfect that I've actually stopped calling them perfect and I just call other songs imperfect. I think Strawberry Fields Forever is a very imperfect song. What this means, though, is that any track that's not perfect can be considered a break in the album, which can be anything from a song that is terrible in every way to a song that's actually amazing but just has one little problem with it. I recognize, though, that this isn't the only qualifier for a perfect album. After studying the opinion of music critics and Reddit users who think they're music critics, I've concluded that the most common recipients of the perfect album title have external importance. They're albums that have some level of influence. Albums like Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd or The Money Store by Death Grips. And that pattern of influence is certainly noticeable in the three albums we'll be going over today. Starting with an album by Radiohead. Now, Radiohead actually has two albums that could qualify for this list, the first being Hail to the Thief, mostly because I can't really vibe with the track Go to Sleep. But no, I want to talk about an album that means more to me, and that is 1995's The Bends. In music, there's often this idea of the sophomore slump album, basically this idea that a new artist's second album is doomed to fall short of their debut, either in success or quality. And part of that comes from the idea that when you're going into your first album, you have all these songs that you've been working on with your band, polishing, smoothing over, and once you begin working on your second album, you have to start from scratch with a new batch of songs. Well, for Radiohead, it was quite the opposite. In fact, according to the band, it was touring for their first album that taught them to be more selective with the tracks they put on record, as those are the tracks they'd have to perform every day for months on end. So that partly explains it, but still doesn't fully reveal how when they got back to the studio, they went from making the mildly successful but not well-received Pablo Honey to making one of the most critically acclaimed and most important alt-rock albums of all time. The Bends kicks off immediately with Planet Telex, which is to this day one of my favorite Radiohead songs. It has a unique sci-fi sound due to a later recording date, which may make it an outlier amongst the track listing, but I still think it's a perfect opener because it lets the listener know right off the bat this album is going to be very exciting musically and it's going to be very dark lyrically. Other tracks like the title track or Black Star take the post-grunge and alt-rock formats and refine them down to a point that I consider completely perfect. And that's not even going over the highlights from the Bends. This album has so many standouts that over half the tracks were released as singles, leading to a whole slew of B-sides, some of which are great, some of which are molasses. This album also features some of the band's most beloved works, Fake Plastic Trees, Nice Dream, and especially the song Just, which is mind-blowing. Overrated video though, don't at me. And to cap it all off, this album ends with one of the best 1-2 punches on any album ever. Despite all the unwarranted hate, Sulk summarizes this album in probably the best way possible, with this beautiful lament on the process of feeling pain, aided by one of Thom Yorke's most powerful vocal performances to date. And of course, this is followed by the album closer Street Spirit Fade Out, which is probably one of the darkest yet most beautiful pieces to come out of this band. But even with that all being said, there is one piece on here that I'm not so crazy about, and if you've heard the album, you probably know which song I'm talking about. It's High and Dry. I was a bit surprised to discover that the Radiohead Gloom Index considers this the saddest song on the album, because this one is noticeably brighter than every other track. In fact, maybe a little too bright, to the point where it sounds like the band is doing an Oasis impression. And I think therein lies my main issue with the track. Wikipedia lists this album as Britpop, but I think High and Dry is the only track on here that I'd even consider giving that title. So not only is there a significant change in sound, but there's also a significant change in intensity as well. I'm not saying every track on here is the heaviest thing ever. Bulletproof I Wish I Was would like to say a word. But in the midst of all these epic, grungy rock songs, interrupting them with this bright, bouncy, almost upbeat sounding Britpop song is sure to give the listener some whiplash. High and Dry sounds almost comical when compared to the other tracks on here, and that, I think, unfortunately belies any emotion that the track had a chance of conveying. So not only is it not exciting, it's not very emotional as well, and that's why it trails behind even a track like Bulletproof I Wish I Was, which I'll admit is probably my next pick for my least favorite, but at least it fits the actual tone of the album. I hope, though, that it doesn't come as a surprise when I say I don't hate High and Dry. Like I said, there's a range in quality for all these tracks. I'm not a big fan of Britpop, but it's Radiohead, so they do it well. It's just that the album it's on and where it's placed in the track list don't really do it much justice. What I do hate, though, is that opening drum beat. So tacky. Now, following the most logical path, we will be moving on from 90s alt-rock to 2010s hip-hop, because yes, I'm one of those people who thinks Damn by Kendrick Lamar is a near-perfect album. A damn near-perfect album, one might say. California-based rapper Kendrick Lamar's Pulitzer Award-winning fourth studio album, Damn, was released in 2017 and mostly deals with the fame and pressure Kendrick experienced after his previous full-length record, To Pimp a Butterfly. Now, I've already covered the Big Pimper in my previous discussion video, which I guess really does make this a spiritual sequel, but yeah, it's obviously one of the most critically acclaimed albums of all time, definitely the most beloved hip-hop album of the 2010s. So Damn had a lot to live up to when it came out only 2 years later. Pimpy Fly and its following B-sides project, Untitled Unmastered, both leaned heavily into the area of jazz rap, so of course Kendrick had to switch up his sound again, incorporating many elements of modern rap and electronic music instead. The single, released in anticipation of the album Humble, ended up becoming his most popular track and is currently one of the most streamed songs of all time on Spotify. In the Kendrick Lamar community, there is sort of this notion that Kendrick's 5-album discography includes 3 classics, those being Good Kid, Mad City, To Pimp a Butterfly, and of course, Damn. But despite this high praise, I've always felt like Damn was looked down upon in comparison to the other two. Anthony Fantano, who gave Good Kid, Mad City a 9 and T-Pab a 10, gave Damn a 7, which he then lowered to a 6 because Bono is fake woke or something.
Just feels kind of spotty.
But Fantano's strange opinions aside, I actually think that Damn beats out Good Kid, Mad City as Kendrick Lamar's second best album. Right away, Damn establishes itself as Kendrick Lamar's creepiest studio album with the song Blood, which is probably the most haunting spoken word piece I've ever heard. And then that transitions immaculately into the next song, DNA. And DNA proves that along with having some of Kendrick's most artful pieces like Fear or Pride, this album also has some of his most wicked pieces. Humble and Element are the concentrated definitions of the word banger. And then the track XXX combines both sides of the album, probably one of Kendrick Lamar's best songs, maybe even better than Mad City. Seriously, if you've not heard this song, go listen to it. The beat switch is incredible. This album also separates itself from his previous works when it comes to the concept, unlike Good Kid or T-Pab, which are more linear narrative works, and Section 80, which is just kind of confused with itself. Damn has Kendrick Lamar's most abstract and, I don't want to say confusing, but hard to parse concepts. I still feel like I'm unpeeling layers and making new connections between songs. And this was further complicated with Kendrick releasing the Damn Collector's Edition, and it's just the entire track list reversed, which is, by the way, a real album that you had to pay for on Apple Music. But anyways, the lyrics on this album are best exemplified by the track Feel, where Kendrick is just going insane mode, listing all these different emotions that he's feeling. And then you have the aforementioned Pride, which along with the other deadly sin, Lust, is some of his most unique yet intensely dark material. And despite the complaints from Anthony Fantano, I can really get behind a track like Love, which is such a serene and idyllic piece, especially where it's placed on the album. I like this album so much I can even get behind a track like God, but I still can't fully get behind the song Loyalty.
It's a secret society. Oh yeah.
So, a majority of Loyalty is based on this heavily distorted looped vocal sample from 24 Karat Magic by Bruno Mars. And while it's cool at first, and certainly an interesting usage of sampling, it does get a little excruciating after a while, and that's just my main problem with the song. I also find the overall tone of it to be a little off, a little slanted. For example, some of Rihanna's vocal harmonies, specifically in the refrain, feel really fake and plasticky. Plus, this little mini hook, "I'm geeked and I'm fired up," is very off-putting, especially with Kendrick's call and response vocals in the back, "Fra, fra," which are just genuinely annoying. And the outro kind of sucks, but hey, at least they got a reference to Humble in, which I guess really does bring me back around to this album as a whole. Despite finding Loyalty to be really commercial and kind of tailor-made for radio, I still don't think Kendrick sold out with Damn, because there's so much artistic merit to this album, not just in concept, but in the individual tracks as well. There's songs on here that I couldn't even fathom playing on any radio station, and like I said, this album includes some of his best work, maybe even his best song in Pride, so I don't think all of that is rendered meaningless because Loyalty goes "Bow." Okay, so this next album we're going to look at is actually from an artist that I've never talked about on this channel before, but it should come as no surprise that I'm a fan. I am talking about Wendigoon's favorite, The Black Parade, by My Chemical Romance, if you don't know who the artist was. Now, the story of how My Chemical Romance was formed is actually very interesting. Frontman Gerard Way, who, fun fact, is also the creator of the Umbrella Academy, was on the way to his job at Cartoon Network when he saw 9/11 happen, and the experience had such a profound effect on him that he wrote a song about it, which then inspired him to quit his job and start a band. That song that he wrote is called Skylines and Turnstiles. It was released on MCR's debut album, and it is not very good. But apparently, that all changed with the release of their second studio album in 2004, 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge. Now, I actually haven't listened to this album yet, but I do know that it is very critically acclaimed. In fact, some of my sources tell me it's even better than The Black Parade. So let me know if I should check that one out. Maybe I'll even do a video on it. But anyways, The Black Parade was made as a follow-up to 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge. I couldn't find a reason why they made this album, like if there was any inciting incident or something. Guitarist Ray Toro said they were trying to make something that would be timeless, which makes this the only instance I've heard of an artist attempting to make a classic and succeeding at it, so congratulations. As you probably know, this album is a concept album based around the idea of somebody dying from cancer. Wendigoon in his video actually has a different track listing for the album, which I think has better pacing and captures the concept a lot better. But I am a stickler for artistic intent, so don't worry, I did not listen to any alternate versions of the album for this video. The album begins with the track The End, Ahaha, which definitely shows this album's Pink Floyd influence. I mean, this is practically a note-for-note recreation of In the Flesh. And that ends with this iconic transition to the next song, Dead. And despite both of those songs being incredible, I don't think they come anywhere near the highlights, one of which is the third track, This Is How I Disappear, which has this very elongated bridge section that just keeps getting more intense. The Sharpest Lives shows off a little more of this album's experimental side, and to skip a little later in the track list, so does the song Sleep with its spoken word field recordings in the intro and outro. And I can't bring up the song without mentioning the absolutely crushing instrumental near the back half of it, which is probably one of this album's most impactful moments. The closer, Famous Last Words, I've seen get hated on a little bit, but honestly, the way these verses transition into the chorus is alone enough to make the entire track, and that's even ignoring the amazingly cathartic bridge section. Fun fact, during the filming of the music video for Famous Last Words, Gerard Way tore a ligament and the drummer was hospitalized for burns on his leg. It's not that good of a music video. Now, I can't imagine someone complaining about this album being one note. I mean, most of the songs are very similar instrumentally, just some emo, pop-punk guitar riff that goes throughout the verse, then it all gets very big and loud for the catchy chorus, while Gerard Way sings like he's playing a supervillain's pet rat in a theater production. But I think this description is vague enough that MCR is able to take it in very different tonal directions, like the very emotionally driven I Don't Love You, or the absolutely maniacal House of Wolves, which actually follow each other on the track list. Now, if I did have to level a complaint at this album, and really this is less of a complaint, more of just an observation, not a lot of these songs have outros. Like, for a vast majority of the songs on here, it's the last word that's said is the final chord and it just rings out, which was a little jarring for me coming from Pink Floyd and Radiohead, bands that aren't known for their prompt endings. Anyways, to talk about the most popular songs on this album, we have Teenagers, which is a very riveting tune with an amazingly quotable chorus. And if you want to talk about one note, then Welcome to the Black Parade has you covered, with probably the most talked about single note in music history. And yes, the piano on that song is iconic, but I honestly prefer its usage on Cancer, which is both easily the softest song on the album and also definitely its most heartbreaking moment. And then you have my favorite song, Mama, which is kind of normal for the first minute, and then it just goes absolutely buck wild for the last 4 minutes. There's this one particular section in the middle, which is the definition of a musical breakdown. And that's all well and good, but if you're familiar with the track list, you'll notice that there's one song I haven't talked about yet, and let's just say it, it's Disenchanted. Now, according to my research, this song was originally written so the band could switch up their set list on tour, and it wasn't supposed to be released, but the bassist, Mikey Way, yes, relation, liked it so much that he whispered its name in the ears of his bandmates while they were sleeping. Also, fun fact, this album was recorded in a haunted mansion. That is a whole other topic. Anyways, the song begins with this mellow acoustic guitar line, which sounds really corny for some reason. We get a short verse, and then the song falls into the usual pop-punk-inspired instrumental, which, thank God. But this does also reveal another issue with the song, and that's that because it's so lacking in other aspects, this song really doesn't have enough to stand out. So it actually does fall into the trap of being really generic for this album. And I don't know what went wrong during the writing process for this song, but the chorus sounds like somebody pointed at a gun in Gerard Way's face and gave him 30 seconds to write a catchy hook. I don't know how to describe it. It's like cooking a dry, flavorless burger patty and then just pouring MSG on it and hoping that'll make it taste good. It just feels really forced. And for how theatrical Gerard Way gets with his vocals, he does a very good job on this album of not sounding really stupid. But the end of the song is the one moment on this album where honestly his vocals make me cringe a bit. It doesn't help that the line he's singing with such emotion is "at all," which is probably up there with "tonight," is one of the most meaningless phrases for someone to sing repeatedly. It's really a shame because I think this song does explore some of the most thought-provoking lyrics on the entire album. Plus, the word Disenchanted is kind of cool. This song had a lot going for it in concept. It's just after hearing what it has to offer musically, can't say I agree with old Mike. Alright, we've gone over the albums. We've ended up with 3 very imperfect songs on 3 slightly imperfect albums. So the logical next step is to rank them all. The tracks, that is, not the albums. Though if you want that ranking, here it is. I had to put a lot of thought into that, as I also did to a lesser extent with the tracks. Now, I know I said there was a range, but these tracks are all roughly in the same ballpark in terms of quality. So I guess sorry for disappointing you, but I imagine it's very hard to make a song that I actively hate while making a ton of songs I consider to be perfect. So, moving up the list at number 3, we have Disenchanted. Because by the nature of the band's existence and the type of music they make, when MCR gets something wrong, they get it more wrong than they should. It's like an Eminem song. You kind of have to nail that style or else you're falling behind everybody else. That is not to say that I think this song is as bad as Fact. That is definitely not what I mean. It's just that this song has a certain level of embarrassment to it that I don't find in the other 2 tracks. The biggest saving grace of this track is that most of it is taken up by the verses, which are very listenable. They're not particularly engaging. The bridge is a little cool, but I think I've said enough about how the choruses make me feel. Number 2 is High and Dry. Fun little Britpop number. Like I said, I don't hate it. It's just I would never actively go out of my way to listen to it. If you held me hostage and said I needed to listen to High and Dry 50 times consecutively to save the lives of my entire family, I'd be happy with that arrangement. Now, if you gave me the choice between High and Dry or any other song on that album, I'd still choose High and Dry because listening to a song that much would probably make me hate it, and I would rather that happen to High and Dry than a song I actually like. The track is still a little cheesy, but unlike My Chemical Romance, Radiohead knows how to handle cheese. They made the song How Can You Be Sure? It's a B-side to this album. If you want to hear an actually good version of High and Dry, go check that out. It's the only Radiohead song to feature female guest vocals, which, holy shit, a whole nother topic discussion surrounding that, but anyways, let's move on to number 1, which by process of elimination is Kendrick's Loyalty. Despite my numerous issues with the production, I actually really enjoy the vibe of this song, which has been my main issue with the other, let's face it, goofy ass tracks. I mean, the song really feels like walking down the streets of a busy city at night and looking at all the lights, which serves as a contrast to the previous track Feel, which sounds like walking down the streets of an abandoned city at night. And the track Pride, which feels like walking down the streets of an abandoned city at night while a nuclear explosion goes off in the distance. This is a very dark sounding album. So yeah, Loyalty is number 1, just like it is on my list of virtues. Don't be snitching. If I had to pick any common thread between these songs, the root of all failures, it would be that they tried too hard. For Kendrick and Radiohead, that would be trying too hard to make a radio song, trying too hard to conform to what was big in the zeitgeist at the time, and crafting these really formulaic pop hits. And hey, they succeeded. Both of these songs are some of the artist's most streamed works, but can't really say they're some of their most beloved. This point applies less to Disenchanted, but it does tie back to what I was saying about the chorus, how it feels really forced. So I guess it goes to show, if you're making an album and you feel like it's going to be a classic, stop trying. And with that, the video is over. Firstly, I want to apologize. Besides that Anthony Fantano video, I've been exclusively posting reaction content. I'll be taking a break from that for a while because I don't want to fall down the tragic reaction tuber pipeline. I promise that the Animals review will come out next month. It's going to be an absolute behemoth. I've also got a pretty great video coming out April 1st, and by that I mean I'm going to love it, and I'm almost certain that you will not. Plus, I've got a few more video essay-like ideas that I'm probably going to do. I mean, I have tons of ideas. It just comes down to how long I take to make them. And if you like the reaction content, don't worry, I still have to release most of those Fantano reactions. Next one is to Pimp a Butterfly, which is... oh no. And that's not even a first reaction, that's a re-reaction, Brad Taste in Music style. But yeah, I know I said in the Fantano video that I'd release them all in the first week of November. You have to realize I stayed up all night editing that video. I was exhausted for like a week afterwards. I also want to apologize for my audio quality, really for every video I've ever made, but specifically for the stuff I've been making since I got this microphone. There was an evil setting on Windows that was automatically turned on. And it looks so innocuous too, it just says device default effects, but no, it ruined everything. Particularly that wall of eyes reaction, that one was rough. But yeah, I finally got this mic working. I'm excited to see how this recording worked out. You know, production value is not usually my strong suit. The next video in this format will be the Animals review, so I will see you then. Bye. Oh, also, blood is bad. Blood is not good. So I guess it was possible for them to make a song I actively hated.